The pliers are 23 years old. The red and blue paint on the handles has worn down to bare steel in the two places where a palm grips it every day. The jaws still snap into place with the same clean, mechanical click they had the day they came out of the box. A mechanic in a shop in Ohio picks them up, adjusts the jaw to the second position, and gets back to work on a fitting that a cheaper pair would have already rounded off. He doesn't think about where they came from. He's never heard of Meadville, Pennsylvania. He just knows they haven't failed him yet. That's the whole story, actually. Not the history, not the family, not the private equity firms circling a small tool company for 40 years. Just a tool that keeps working long after it was supposed to be replaced, made by a company that had every reason to sell out and never did. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories behind the brands and the machines that built the working world, the founders, the factories, the decisions that either held a company together or quietly tore it apart. If that's the kind of history you want more of, go ahead and subscribe now, because this one has all three. In the mid-2000s, according to people close to the business, a private investment group approached the DeArmond family with an offer to buy Channellock outright. Real money, the kind of number that changes a family's life. Channellock is widely regarded as the largest independent pliers maker left in America, with more hardware store shelf space than almost any of its old competitors. Its signature tongue-and-groove pliers design dates back to 1933. The factories are still standing in Meadville, where the company has been rooted for more than a century. The family said no. That single decision put Channellock on a different path than almost every other American tool company built in the same era. To understand why the no mattered, you have to understand what yes had already cost everyone else. American tool manufacturing spent the back half of the 20th century being taken apart, piece by piece, by people who never touched a lathe. Private equity firms moved through the industry buying independent tool makers with a repeatable playbook, acquire the company, move the factory overseas, keep the name on the box, and let the label coast on a reputation it took decades to build and almost no time at all to hollow out. It worked extremely well for the people who put up the money. It worked considerably worse for everyone who had ever trusted the name on the tool. You can watch the pattern play out in real companies with real names. Snap-on started in 1920 in Milwaukee, selling interchangeable sockets straight to mechanics before it became known for the rolling tool trucks that still show up in garages every week. Crescent Tool Company introduced its adjustable wrench in 1907 and turned the name into a household word for an entire category of tool. Klein Tools, founded in 1857, has somehow stayed in Klein hands through 6 generations. William Peterson patented the first vise grip locking pliers in 1924. 4 companies, 4 different starting points, 4 very different endings. Crescent Tool got bought by Cooper Industries in 1968. Cooper's tool division later folded into Apex Tool Group when Apex was formed in 2010, a joint venture between Cooper and Danaher. The name Crescent is still stamped on wrenches today. The knowledge of how the earliest ones were built the old way didn't survive the transitions in between. Every sale added a new layer of distance between the people deciding what mattered and the people who actually made the tool. Vice grip tells almost the same story with different dates. American tool companies bought Peterson Manufacturing in 1985. Newell Rubbermaid bought American Tool in 2002. Stanley Black & Decker bought the Irwin Tool business. vice grip included in 2017. 3 sales, 3 sets of new owners, and at every handoff, someone took money out of the business on their way through the door. Picture the room where those decisions get made. A team of consultants arrives with a spreadsheet. They go line by line, and labor cost is the biggest number they can move, so labor cost is the first thing they touch. A factory in the U.S. Paying a living wage looks bad next to a factory overseas paying a fraction of it. On paper, the decision writes itself. The executives sign off. Nobody in that room has ever run the stamping press or felt a rivet seat wrong under their thumb, and nobody at that table will be the one answering the warranty claim 2 years later. The move gets made anyway, because the spreadsheet doesn't have a column for the thing that actually made the tool worth buying. Making a good pair of pliers is not a spreadsheet problem. How tight should the jaw grip before it starts to slip? Where does the failure actually begin? The pivot, the tooth, the heat treat? Which alloy holds up under torque without turning brittle? These are questions that get answered slowly, over years, through workers handling the tool every day, customers complaining about exactly what breaks, and engineers making small corrections one batch at a time. When a company gets sold and the factory moves overseas, that accumulated knowledge mostly doesn't make the trip. The name on the box survives. The reason the name used to mean something usually doesn't. To see why Channellock went a different way, you have to go back further than the pliers themselves. Back to 1886, when a young blacksmith named George B. DeArmond started hand-forging farrier's tools in Evansburg, Pennsylvania, and selling them out of the back of a wagon. The business incorporated as the Champion Bolt and Clipper Company and moved to Meadville in 1904, a relocation that put it closer to steel suppliers and the rail lines that could carry finished tools out across the country. DeArmond's sons, Allman and Howard, came in as partners, and the company grew into hammers and general hand tools under the name Champion DeArmond Tool Company. By the time the product that would define the company's next 100 years showed up, the business had already spent 3 decades learning how to forge steel, run a factory floor, and sell through hardware dealers who wouldn't stock a tool that didn't hold up. The turning point came in 1933. Ordinary adjustable pliers of the era slipped constantly under real load. A mechanic would get a firm grip, apply pressure, and feel the jaw shift right when it mattered most. He'd stop, retighten, and get back to it. This happened so often that most people had simply learned to work around it, the way you learn to work around any tool that almost does its job. Howard Manning, the company's chief engineer, decided that almost wasn't good enough. He designed a tongue-and-groove, multi-position, slip-joint mechanism that let a mechanic change the jaw opening in a second while keeping the jaws parallel for a grip that didn't move. The company patented the design and named the pliers Channellock. By the early 1960s, the name had become so synonymous with the tool itself that the company renamed itself Channellock Incorporated just to protect the trademark. An outside inventor with the same idea would have spent years pitching skeptical investors on a tool nobody had asked for. Manning didn't have that problem. He was building inside a company that already had a working factory, an established dealer network, and a family willing to bet on the idea. A patent with no company behind it usually goes nowhere. A patent built inside a company that already knew how to get a tool onto a hardware store shelf had a real path forward from day one. Here's where the vintage market tells you something the sales figures never could. Channellock pliers made before the 1980s, particularly the socket sets, combination, wrenches, and slip joints from the 1940s through the 70s, carry real value in collector and working tool communities today. And it has nothing to do with nostalgia. It has to do with metallurgy. Tools from that era were forged from domestically sourced chrome vanadium steel, held to tolerances by machinists running equipment calibrated for precision rather than speed. A Channellock pair from 1955, properly cared for, still closes with the same dimensional accuracy it left the factory with 70 years ago. Forums like Practical Machinist and Garage Journal track these tools the way other collectors track vintage watches: provenance, condition, original finish. Working machinists and restoration specialists hunt them down not because they're old, but because they still outperform a lot of what's on the shelf today, and they know it. The company built its reputation dealer by dealer over decades, and the story it has told about itself is simple. A broken pair of pliers meant a replacement, not an argument. Whether that guarantee was always honored exactly as generously as company lore suggests is hard to verify from the outside. What's not hard to verify is the logic underneath it. A factory that has to eat the cost of every failure cannot quietly hide a bad batch of steel or a worn die for long. Somebody notices, because somebody has to pay for it. A family running its own operation builds in a kind of honesty that a distant management team, 3 sales removed from the factory floor, simply doesn't have the same incentive to maintain. That honesty is expensive in the short term and valuable in the long term. Customers who trusted Channellock pliers bought more Channellock pliers and told other people to do the same. No discount competes with that. No advertising budget replicates the effect of a tool that just works. Everything around Channellock kept changing, while the company itself mostly didn't. Hardware retail consolidated hard over the following decades. Independent hardware stores, each making its own buying decisions, gave way to a small number of national chains that now account for most tool sales in the country. Those chains have real leverage, and they use it, demanding lower prices from manufacturers because there are so few other places left to sell a hammer or a pair of pliers. Public companies answering to shareholders got caught in a trap that had no good exit. Investors wanted growth every quarter, but shelf space in a store is fixed. Somebody has to lose space for somebody else to gain it. When a big chain squeezes a supplier on price, a company with public shareholders has very little room to say no. A private, debt-free family company has a different kind of room. It can walk away from a bad deal, even if that means a smaller number this quarter, because there's no lender expecting cash on a schedule and no outside investor pushing for a record quarter at the expense of the next decade. That structure is nearly impossible to buy back once a company has already sold pieces of itself to outside money, which is exactly why the mid-2000s offer mattered so much, and why turning it down closed a door that, for most of Channellock's old rivals, had already been kicked open. There's a story that circulates inside the company, the kind that never makes it into a press release. In the early 2000s, a longtime Channellock dealer in western Pennsylvania got a visit from a regional buyer for one of the big national chains, offering a much larger order on the condition that Channellock shave a few cents off the wholesale price by trimming steel thickness on one product line. It's a small ask on paper. It's the exact kind of ask that, multiplied across every product line and every year, is how a tool company quietly stops being the tool company people trusted. The order, as the story goes, was declined. No headline, no announcement. Just a family that had heard a version of that request before and knew exactly what saying yes eventually costs. The consolidation strategy looked good on paper for a reason, which is worth admitting plainly. Bigger companies really could manufacture a wider range of products more cheaply by spreading fixed costs across more brands. They really could negotiate better shelf placement with the big chains by offering a dozen names in one deal instead of one. Financial buyers really could purchase a company at one price, cut its costs, and sell the pieces off later at a higher one. Moving a factory overseas really did cut labor costs dramatically, sometimes by more than half. None of that was a lie. The spreadsheet was usually right about the number. It just wasn't asking the only question that mattered, which was whether the tool would still be worth buying in 10 years, once the people who knew how to make it properly were gone. Family businesses usually break at the handoff. The outgoing owner cashes out, or the incoming generation wants to prove itself by doing something different. Channellock is currently run by the fourth and fifth generations of the DeArmond family, and each generation appears to have absorbed the same lesson from the one before it. The company survives because it solves a real problem honestly, and it stays strong because the people running it actually care what happens to the product after it leaves the building. That kind of discipline doesn't happen by accident. Passing along the specific memory of what happened to the competitors who sold out, Crescent, Vise Grip, and the rest, is itself part of how the company has stayed independent for 5 generations running. Something shifted over the 2010s that the DeArmonds didn't engineer, but benefited from anyway. The big, consolidated tool companies kept hitting their profit targets on paper, but they'd lost the tight connection between maker, seller, and user that used to define what these brands meant. Meanwhile, as cheap imported tools failed more often and Made in America started to carry weight again with buyers, Channellock's old-fashioned approach began to look modern, almost accidentally. The family hadn't repositioned anything. They just kept doing what they'd always done. Online video changed how that reputation spread. Word of mouth used to move at the speed of a conversation on a job site. Now a single video of a decades-old Channellock pair, still gripping tight, sitting next to a cheap import that snapped within a year, reaches an audience the company never had to buy. Tradespeople online point to exactly that comparison over and over, favoring tools that don't fail mid-job. Channellock never had to pay for that advertisement. The tool made it for them. Today, the company still faces real pressure. New generations have to learn the business, one relationship, and one mistake at a time. Same as the Dermot sons and grandsons before them. Cheap imported pliers still win on price at the shelf, where a customer standing in a hardware aisle rarely sees the 10 years of use sitting inside the more expensive pair next to it. A debt-free company can't scale as fast as one backed by outside capital, and that's a trade-off the family appears to have made peace with a long time ago. Steel prices move outside anyone's control. Skilled workers eventually retire, and finding people willing to learn a trade takes real effort in a country that has spent 2 generations steering its kids toward office jobs instead of factory floors. None of that has an easy fix. The company will keep solving it the way it always has. one decision at a time, made by someone who actually works there, not by a consultant reading a spreadsheet from 3 states away. Most people who own a pair of Channellock pliers don't know a word of this. They reach into the toolbox, grab the red and blue handles, and use them without a second thought about how they got there or why they still work after 20 years of hard use. That's arguably the entire point. A tool that has to explain itself to justify its price hasn't quite earned its keep. Channellock pliers don't come with a plaque. They just keep gripping, keep holding, keep doing the job long after the cheaper pair next to them has cracked or slipped. Back in that Ohio shop, the mechanic sets the pliers down on the bench, still warm from his grip, and reaches for the next job. He'll pick them up again tomorrow. He'll pick them up in 10 years. He has no idea he's holding proof of a decision a family made in a boardroom 2 decades ago, and the 4 decisions before that, and the one Howard Manning made in 1933, when he decided that almost gripping tight enough wasn't good enough. He just knows the tool hasn't let him down yet. For a company that's never bought a single ad campaign built around that fact, that's not an accident. That's the whole business model. If the history of the brands that built the working world is the kind of story you want to keep hearing, subscribe to the channel. There are more companies like this one, built on decisions that required more discipline than most organizations can manage, run by people who said no when saying yes would have been so much easier. Each one has a story worth telling the right way. See you in the next one.